This is chapter 4, section on Jainism. We're going to spend a week talking about Jainism. It is an offshoot of Hinduism. It came from India, and still a majority of Jains live in India today. Next week we're going to start talking about Buddhism. We're going to find there are a lot of similarities between Jainism and Buddhism. Here I started with a quote from the Yoga Sastra, which was written in 500 BCE, around the time of Jainism's origins. It says, "Non-injury to all living beings is the only religion." This is the first truth, the first rule of Jainism. And this is really, really important to understand about the Jains. This importance of respecting all life, large or small. We're going to see, Hindus, a large number of Hindus choose to be vegetarian, in respect for animals and for their souls, but Jains take that to kind of the next level and try to respect even plants, microorganisms, and all sorts of different things. And this is a really important ethical rule within Jainism. We'll also see that a lot of people have mentioned, as we've studied Hinduism, that seems odd to them. There's no really strict rules of ethics, no code of conduct put forth in Hinduism the way we have, the Ten Commandments in Judeo-Christian Islamic religions in the West. And we'll see that Jainism has a good number of lists of ethical rules and codes of conduct. So in this first lecture, we're going to talk about Mahavira, who's the founder of Jainism. He was the 24th of the 24 Tirthankaras. We're going to talk about who the Tirthankaras are. We're going to talk a little bit about the philosophy and ethics of Jainism as well. So hopefully in this lecture, you just kind of get a sense of what Jainism is about. In the next lecture, we'll talk about practices and things. And for the third part of this section, we're going to do some reading. We're going to read some Jain texts and discuss those. So I've included here a map of India. You'll see the majority of India is Hindu, of course, but there's also a very large Muslim population. This particular map shows the four major religious minorities within India: the Jains, the Sikhs, the Buddhists, and Christians. So the Jains are the smallest of the religious minorities. There are not a lot of Jains left in the world. In fact, I think it is the smallest of the major world religions. We call the major world religions. There may be almost 6 million Jains worldwide. The majority of them live in India or in one of the countries surrounding India. There's a small population of Jains in America, in Europe, but not many. So you can see here the majority of Jains live here in this western section of India, where Jainism originated. But even here, where the majority of Jains live, they still only make up 2 to 7% of the total population of that area. So they are a very small minority, even where the majority of them are. Also see that you can kind of see some of the other religious minorities that live in India. The Sikhs will not have a chance to talk about in this class, unfortunately, but it's just a fascinating religious tradition. Read up on it if you have a chance. There are still a good number of Buddhists, almost 8 million Buddhists, who live in India, here up in the north, here in central India, and also to the east. And also there are as many as 25 million Christians living in India, many of whom live down in the southern part of India and then over here in the east. So, as I mentioned, these three religions here, Jainism, Sikhism, Buddhism, are all, at least in some way, offshoots of Hinduism. Sikhism was also influenced by Islam, but Jainism, Buddhism in particular, are offshoots of Hinduism. Both the Jains and the Buddhists take this question of moksha, of liberation, and the world of samsara, and they kind of explore these problems and these questions in different ways. So what are the major differences between Hinduism and Jainism? What are the similarities? Well, Jainism, as an offshoot of Hinduism, has a lot of the same philosophical concepts. Jains believe in karma, dharma, samsara, yoga, moksha, that we're all stuck in this cycle of rebirth. They follow the ascetic tradition, very similar to the yogi tradition within Hinduism. In fact, there are many Jain yogis who, live out in the mountains and cover themselves with ash and meditate as Shiva and Shaivites do. They do believe in the existence of gods and demons. It's something that differentiates them from Buddhists. Buddhists don't believe in the existence of gods or demons. Well, Buddhists are neutral on the subject. Let's say that. We'll talk more about that next week. But Jains do believe in the existence of gods and demons, but they don't necessarily hold them up to a higher level as a higher beings, right? Jains tend to avoid worshiping gods. They believe that gods are just like human beings, just like everything with a soul, with a jiva, as I call it. Gods are subject to the same problems, the same vices of anger and getting karma, building up karma, and are stuck in samsara as much as we are. Jains believe that actually it's better to be a human being. As human beings, we have a balance of rationality, reason that lower animals don't have, so we can understand our situation. But gods and demons have more reasons to be attached to the world because they have so much power over samsara, right? They have so much power over the world. It's a lot harder for them to break that attachment and find moksha. Jains believe that human beings have the right balance of reason, but also reasons to not want to be attached. Some of the other differences between Hinduism and Jainism, just in the way Jains kind of understand or interpret some of these philosophical concepts. In Jainism, karma is very much related to purity. Jains think of karma almost like a physical residue that builds up, like a karma body, as if everything within samsara is almost tainted with karma or made up with karma somehow. Right? So there's this great emphasis for literal purity, keeping a clean home and things like that, but also spiritual purity. Jain's concept of yoga emphasizes ethical rules. As I said, they're not so interested in finding union with Brahman. That is a concept within Jainism, but it's not as much emphasized. It's more about it's less about worshiping or devotion. It's less about bhakti. And it's more about living a good life, an ethical life. Liberation, moksha, is also called jina in Jainism, and that's where we get the word Jain from. Jina means winner. So someone who has achieved moksha is a jina, is a winner. They've won out over the world. And to attain moksha, there does, just like in Hinduism, there needs to be the removal of karma and not building up more karma. But again, there's this emphasis put on purity and purification. And interestingly, Jain texts use this word perfection a lot when they talk about moksha. People attain perfection. So they're perfecting themselves by getting rid of the taint of karma. In general, Jains, a lot of Jain monks and nuns take asceticism to more of an extreme than we will see, more of an extreme that we'll see in Buddhism especially. But we'll see a lot of the ways that Jains limit themselves and try and create a simple life in order to avoid attachment, in order to rid themselves of karma. Some other differences, as I mentioned, there's this great emphasis in Jainism on living a very simple life, avoiding consumerism, things like that. The caste system is not recognized officially in Jainism. One of the big things, I should have put this in bold letters, this is important, Jainism is not Vedic. So the Vedas, the Rig Veda, all those things we talked about in the first lesson on Hinduism that talk about the Brahman, the Brahman is the Atman, and explains some of the different gods and these sorts of different things. Jainism is not based on that. Some Jains contend that the real tradition of Jainism might predate Hinduism and the Vedas. That's debatable. We don't really know. But the thing to take away is that they do not follow the Vedas. So they refer to the Atman as the Jiva or the Jivatma, but it's a very similar concept, almost identical to the Hindu idea of the Atman, the self that needs to be returned to the whole. Though again, there's less of an emphasis put on Brahman. So another part of not worshiping the gods is this idea that intervention can't help you reach moksha, right? Even if, and by that I mean the intervention of the gods, the interventions of the Tirthankaras themselves, who are the great sages of Jainism, asking for their help through worship, that can't help you reach moksha. The only way you're going to reach moksha and purification and perfection is through personal effort. It is all solely on your shoulders to follow the ethical rules of the religion and live a good life and try to rid yourself of karma. And we'll talk more about that in the next lecture. Jains do have temples. They do have images there of the Tirthankaras. They do have puja for them, but they interpret it in a different way, right? They're venerating them. They're respecting these images. They might ask for help, but Jainism teaches that you shouldn't expect it. You can ask for help from the Tirthankaras or from the unseen reality, but you shouldn't expect it. Rather, you should count on yourself to assume that you have to do this yourself in your life. So Hinduism kind of eschews like lists of right conduct and ethical principles and philosophical concepts. Jainism has a lot of them. See, Jainism has a lot of lists of ways of thinking incorrectly about the world in terms of misunderstanding samsara and things like that, ethical practices, vows, different kinds of vows, large vows as they call them for monks and nuns, and then smaller vows for lay people, for average people. And so it is much more rule based. And finally, the importance of the monastic community. We're going to see this in Buddhism as well. Jainism has a very well respected monastic community, monks and nuns. They don't, to my knowledge, Jains don't really have a priesthood. Or if they do, they don't have much of a priesthood. It's more about the monks and nuns who dedicate themselves to simple life, like Mahavira, who we're going to talk about, the founder of Jainism, followed a simple life of meditation and wisdom and trying to attain moksha. Knowledge and wisdom and discipline, self-discipline, are all very important concepts within Jainism. They even have a holiday where they go through each family goes through all the books they have, all the religious books they have of Jainism, and they clean them and they venerate them almost like idols themselves, right? They go through these books. Knowledge is very, very important. And it's through knowledge and understanding of the self, of the jiva, the soul, why it's stuck in samsara, how it can get out of samsara. It's through knowledge that we gain liberation, not through gods, not through anything else, but through knowledge and putting that knowledge to good use and good work. Okay, so I might give you some context then, the differences, the similarities and the differences between Hinduism and Jainism. It should be said that Jains and Hindus get along very well in India. Many of the Tirthankaras are very well respected by Hindus, and many Hindu leaders, gurus, and so on and so forth are very well to my knowledge, there's no real tension between these two groups. So Mahavira is the founder of Jainism. I have a picture here, an image of him. You'll see that it's kind of similar in a lot of ways to images of Buddha. A lot of times, though, you see Mahavira, he has dark skin. A lot of times you'll see him nude, completely nude, or mostly nude. You also see him with a canopy of snakes over his head, very similar to the way they show Shiva in Hinduism. So Mahavira literally means the great hero. He was Jainism's founder. He was a contemporary of the Buddha. We're going to see next week when we study the Buddha, the Gautama Buddha, that there are a lot of similarities between the stories of Mahavira and Buddha. Like the Buddha, Mahavira was a prince of the Kshatriya clan in what is now northern India. His mother had a series of dreams before he was born that he was going to be a great man, a great leader. He renounced his regal life, his life of royalty and things to follow an ascetic life when he was around 30 years old. Mahavira lived a life of extreme asceticism for 12 years in order to achieve nirvana. When I say extreme asceticism, I mean full fasting for 2 or 3 days, and that includes fasting from water even. The stories of him fasting for up to 6 months. It said that when he meditated, nothing could bother him. And there are many stories about during those 12 years as he was a wandering ascetic, how people not recognizing him as their prince would bother him, or they'd think that he was just a scam artist, or that he was a robber, or things like that, and they mistreated him very badly. And with his intense yogic powers and meditative powers, he was never bothered by any of that. There's a quote in the book that once he sat in a village meditating, and the villagers wanted him out, and they told him to get out, but he was so deep into his meditation that he didn't even notice them. So finally it says, they cut his flesh, they tore his hair, they covered him with dirt. They picked him up and then dropped him, disturbing his meditational postures. Abandoning concern for his body, free from desire, the Venerable One humbled himself and bore the pain. Right, so these things didn't even bother him. And there are a series of stories of things that he went to in order to reach moksha. And I have some pictures here illustrating the different things that he went through on that journey. So picture here, this is when Mahavira left his regal life. You can see everyone gathered to see him leave. He was well beloved. He was a well beloved prince. He was intelligent, and he was very kind, and he, people thought he was going to be a great king, so they gathered to see him go. And he gave up all of his clothes, and this is something you see a lot when it comes to monks and nuns within Jainism, this idea that anything that you own, any stuff at all, even your clothes, can form an attachment to this world. There's a story of one of the other Tirthankaras, one of the older Tirthankara, who meditated for many years and was never able to reach moksha until he realized that the one thing he was still attached to was the earth itself, because he knew he was on his brother's land. He knew he was standing on his brother's land as he meditated. And that thought that he was in his brother's space and that this land itself belonged to his brother was the one thing that was holding him back. So once he realized that even the land itself belongs to no one, it belongs to everyone, and it is in and of itself illusion anyway. Once he realized that, he was finally able to reach moksha. He was finally able to reach nirvana. Mahavira, when he starts his ascetic path, he cuts his hair, and he pulls it out. And Jain monks and nuns still do this to this day when they enter the monastery. Their hair is pulled out. They literally rip the hair out of their heads, and they don't even feel it. It doesn't even bother them. Right? This is something Mahavira did as well. It doesn't bother them because they put themselves deep in a meditative state. There have been a lot of interesting medical studies about that, about how meditation can cause people can let people control their pain responses. This is a very old thing in Hinduism, or in India. This is kind of old news there. But he gives up his clothes and everything. You see his mother seeing him off. Later on, he gives up what little clothes he has to a Brahmin priest who was asking for alms because Mahavira had nothing else to give him. And then he goes through a series of trials where various evil spirits and demons try and upset his meditation. And you see this a lot in Jainism and Buddhism both. Whenever someone is on the path towards moksha, towards liberation, there are always these evil demons who come to tempt them, to bother them while they're meditating, to try and upset their practice. And so there's a series of stories. This one here was all of these different things are actually all these different creatures that are bothering him, that are trying to break him out of his meditation. They're all from Yaksha Shulpani, who was like an evil spirit that he encountered in his travels and in his wandering. So he was doing a standing meditation, you can see, and Yaksha Shulpani sent all of these demons and animals and different things to bite him and to try and push him and to try and break him out of his meditation, try to evoke anger in him and fear. And the story goes that Mahavira was, so pure by that point. He felt nothing but compassion for his tormentor, and he told him that he should try to destroy his anger, that his anger was keeping him, even as a demon, he had a soul, was keeping him from reaching moksha, and he should try to live a peaceful life and try and live in harmony with other people instead of allowing his anger to control him. So that's as much of a reaction as Shulpani got out of Mahavira. Later on, Mahavira's traveling again, and he encounters this village that's being tormented by this giant cobra that lives outside of the village. And this cobra is so vicious and it's so well known that they even have a name for it. It's the Chankausik. So Mahavira goes out to see what he can do about it, and he finds this cobra. And this cobra is just like an evil, angry thing, and it bites him on the foot. I don't know if you can see this down here, past this little image. But there's actually milk coming out of his foot. The story goes that the cobra bit Mahavira, and instead of blood rushing out of the wound, the cobra was amazed to see milk rushing out. And the milk was a symbol of Mahavira's great compassion and love and a sense of nurturing he had even for this awful cobra. The cobra tried to poison him, he tried to frighten him, but Mahavira wouldn't be budged. And he only showed great compassion for the cobra, and he even protected the cobra from the villagers who wanted to kill it. And the cobra was so moved by Mahavira's kindness that it was able to purge itself of its own anger and its own evil, and it became a kind creature that didn't bother anyone else for the rest of its life. This is a very popular story within Jainism, right? So again, this idea that through meditation you can purge yourself of anger and negative emotions. Number of negative emotions that are signs of attachment to the world: fear, anger, so on and so forth. Later on, while meditating, he was tortured by a demon named Sangam. You can see they tried to burn him up. They wrapped this demon wrapped snakes around him, all these different things. And Mahavira bore the pain. It didn't bother him. The only thing that bothered him again was his compassion for the demon, that this demon, while doing all these horrible things, was building up karma for itself and was going to be stuck in samsara. And at the climax of the story, Mahavira weeps, but he doesn't weep in pain, he weeps in sadness for this demon that is wasting its time trying to hurt people. So all these animals and people and demons, these are all creations of the demon trying to break Mahavira out of his meditation. The last story is that Mahavira was meditating again. A cowherd passed by him, and the cowherd thought that maybe he was looking for work or something, and the cowherd told him, go up and gather my cows. I need, it's the end of the day, go gather my cows for me. So Mahavira, though, was kind of unaware of what he was being told because he was in such a deep state of meditation. Next morning, the cowherd comes out, and all of his cows are scattered because no one gathered them up that night, right? They've just all wandered off. And the cowherd is so angry that he yells at Mahavira. Mahavira doesn't notice, and he yells, and he tries to push him, and he yells at him. And Mahavira is just completely unaware of all of this, and the cowherd thinks that he's being made fun of, that he's purposely ignoring him. And so he takes nails and a rock, and he gets close to his head. And he says, "Aren't you listening to me?" And he drives nails into Mahavira's ears. And it goes that even Mahavira felt this pain that was very, very painful, but yet he bore it and he said nothing. And he showed compassion for the cowherd. And so after all of these trials, all of these people trying to move him to anger, to sadness, anger, fear, selfishness, and other sorts of things, he endured all of it, and he showed nothing but compassion for even the most evil. And eventually he finally reached moksha. He found perfection and omniscience. You can see the light coming out of his head, radiating from him because he gained understanding and enlightenment. And that is the story of Mahavira, the 24th of the Tirthankara. So, as I've said, there are actually 24 Tirthankaras. So for Jains, they believe that throughout time there have been many Tirthankaras who have come, who are they're called ford makers, literally ford makers. They're great sages and teachers, and they come to help civilization, help humanity by teaching them ethics, teaching them rules of civilization, like laws and order and religion and things like that. So for Jains, Mahavira, he was the founder of Jainism, but in a lot of ways he was a continuation of the line. That's very interesting. We're going to see this in a lot of religions that consider themselves not new religions, but continuations of a tradition. Christianity does this with the figure of Jesus. For Christians, Jesus was not the beginning of Christianity. He was the continuation of a line that reached back all the way to the Hebrews, the Jewish people. Muslims consider the Prophet Muhammad to be the final of a number of prophets that came before him. So in these ways, these religions aren't really new religions to their believers. They are continuations, or in some cases, they are renewing older traditions that have been lost or mixed up in some way, right? But Mahavira, as the last Tirthankara, was considered to be the greatest of the Tirthankaras. Yes. So, like the Hindus, the Jains do believe that the universe, that time is cyclical, goes in these huge cycles. And Hindus and Jains both believe that time goes through eras of time, sections of time, in which humanity is more or less virtuous. Generally, and this is not a hard and fast rule, but generally, Hindus tend to think of humanity as starting this cycle of life, the cycle of the world, starting with human beings being very unvirtuous, being very cruel, being very small-minded and ignorant, and that era by era things are getting better, right? And that in the final era of this cycle, humanity will be at its best. It will be at its most virtuous. And as a result, people will live longer lives, and people may even show special powers and things like that as things get better. Jains look at the cycle differently. They think that it begins with people at their most virtuous, and that over time things are denigrating, things are falling apart. And as things fall apart, there's an increasing need for teachers, the Tirthankaras, to show up and help get things back on track, right? As things get worse, there are Tirthankaras who come and teach people about ethics, about being good to each other. And for the Jains, the most important part of civilization is religion. And for Jains, religion means ethical values. These two things are completely connected. Ethics is religion, and religion is ethics for the Jains. Mahavira is the last of the Tirthankaras, if I'm not mistaken. I don't believe that there will be more, but there are still a number of really great teachers with the Jainism, gurus and yogis and things like that, who help continue this tradition of teaching ethics and things like that. So that's the Tirthankaras, and there are a number of stories about the other 23 Tirthankaras, which I won't get into because there's so many of them. But each one is known by the Jains, and they all have stories related to them and the times throughout history in which they showed up. And so I got asked this: what happens at the end of the cycle within Hinduism, within Eastern thought? What happens at the end of talking about how the world is a cycle, like time is a cycle? Things start again, right? Like once you get to the end of the cycle, everything starts over again. So even the universe itself, like us, the universe itself is in a cycle almost of death and rebirth. Almost, it's all interconnected. It's all reflected on different levels. So here's a quote from the Ecological Sutra, a very important text within Jainism. It says, "All breathing, existing, living, sentient creatures should not be slain, nor treated with violence, nor abused, nor tormented, nor driven away. This is the pure, unchangeable, eternal law. Correctly understanding the law, one should arrive at an indifference for the impressions of the senses and not act on the motives of the world." This is really important because Jains interpret the word creature, they interpret life very, very broadly. It includes microorganisms, includes mosquitoes, includes plants even. Fire and water have a certain creaturely body that can be abused as well. So a lot of what Jainism is about trying to live your life in such a way as you do not do harm to other creatures. That includes the way you work. That includes the way you eat. They're very strict. Jains are very strict vegans. And another important part of this is where it says this is the pure, unchangeable, eternal law. For Jains, this law of not harming other creatures is universal. And we're going to see the way that plays out in their holidays and in their texts and in all of their practices. It's very interesting. Yes. And like Hinduism, again, like we saw in the Bhagavad Gita, this idea that you should have a certain indifference for the motives of the world. So not be concerned about success or failure. But rather be more concerned with being a good person. So, let's talk a little bit more about karma and talk about some of these ethical pillars. We're going to talk more about this, the way this takes practice in the next lecture. So, Jains call karma a subtle matter. This very minute, almost unnoticeable stuff, like physical stuff that accumulates and clings to us as we think and act. We have to learn to distinguish between destructive and non-destructive types. So again, the idea that there are non-destructive types of karma, but still karma is always karma. Our karma always keeps us stuck. We have to eliminate all of our karma to attain kevala. Kevala is the word for perfection. So again, this idea of purifying and perfecting yourself. And there are 3 basic principles to avoid the accumulation of karma. This is the first Jain list that we're going to look at this week. Ahimsa, aparigara, garha, and anekantwad. Sorry, my Sanskrit isn't very good. I think this is Sanskrit. Any event. So ahimsa is nonviolence, right? We looked at that in the first slide. We just talked about that. Not harming any creature. And some people will take that to the extreme of wearing a mask, a surgical mask, so they don't inhale any tiny creatures that might live in the air or accidentally, swallow a fly or something like that. Some people will take that to the extreme of carrying a broom with them and brushing the ground as before they walk on it to brush away any small insects that they might accidentally step on. Monks and nuns in particular do that. Lay Jains, your average Jain who has a family and a house, probably doesn't go to that extreme, but that is what some people do. The second principle is non-attachment. Again, we can't be attached to anything, even our clothes, or any part of our life. And this is another way that Jainism is very similar to Buddhism. Being detached from the world, being non-attached to things, is an important part of both Jainism and Buddhism that's constantly emphasized. And finally, non-absolutism. This is a really interesting part of Jainism. And what non-absolutism means is to recognize that, to have the humility to recognize that we ourselves don't necessarily have the truth. We don't necessarily have the whole story. Like the metaphor or the fable of the 3 blind men who encountered an elephant, and each one is touching the elephant. They're trying to figure out what it is, and one blind man is touching the trunk, and he says, "Oh, this is the long vine. This is what we found." Another one is touching the elephant's back, and he says, "No, we found a wall. This is a big wall." And the other one is pulling on its tail and says, "No, this is a rope. This is a rope that we found." So so Jains say none of us have the full picture. We have some of the truth. We don't have all the truth. And again, knowledge is central to Jainism and to this idea of perfecting oneself by learning to recognize the world for what it really is and learning to recognize ourselves for what we really are. So that being said, Jains put this emphasis on recognizing that we don't necessarily have the whole truth. There's a Jain saying that the wise man never says this is, this isn't. The wise man will always say this may be, this may not be, or this may or may not be, right? So even a wise person knows no one knows for sure. And so we'll see in a lot of the holidays, study is an important part of celebrating recognizing, important days, the important days in the life of Mahavira and things like that. Study is very important. We'll see later this week, there are books for children teaching them about the ethical pillars of Jainism, and it all comes back to knowledge, to understanding, right? So the first part of that is not being attached to this idea that I know everything, that I have the answers. Even to say to yourself, I know what to do to reach perfection, to reach moksha, is being attached. It's being attached to the idea that that you could know, that there's nothing more for you to learn, and that's just ego. That's not helpful. rather a wise person recognizes that we don't have all the answers. So it implies a lot of open-mindedness. And for that reason, you'll see that Jains are often involved in a lot of interfaith work, working with members of other religions. And we'll also see that they even have lists of vows that they encourage non-Jains to take, or that they teach non-Jains. So Jains don't necessarily try to convert people to their religion, but they do teach about their own ethical principles and encourage people to embrace things like veganism. Environmentalism has become really important in Jainism for obvious reasons, animal rights, and all sorts of things like that. So that is the basis of Jainism, basically.